Our next panel is outside support in good company. I'm very pleased that we have such a great group of people here that can guide us through the pitfalls, the trials, and what needs to be done both in starting companies and in advising those of us on how to build and grow. Our moderator for today's session is Andrew Rasiej. Andrew is a longtime friend, and I'm very pleased that he's joined us today. Andrew is a serial entrepreneur, currently the founder of Personal Democracy Forum, runs a New York New Media Meetup, which brings together, I think, 30,000 companies over the years now. Is that the?
It's 41,000 members, actually.
Sorry, 41,000 members. Sorry, I was lowballing. And really is one of the most active startup helpers and guiders here in New York City and in the region, in the area. So I'd like to turn it over to Andrew to introduce his panel.
Thank you, Andrew.
Go to it. Thank you.
So, good morning. I think I said that right. Maybe not. Correct me if I'm wrong.
About right.
But before we begin, as Andrew mentioned, I'm the chairman of the New York Tech Meetup, which is now 41,000 members and grows by about 600 people a month. It represents the startup industry in New York. And for those of you who know, and for those of you who don't, New York is in the middle of a technology renaissance. Not only are we starting lots of new companies, but every major industry in New York is converting itself into a digital business. We don't like comparing ourselves to Silicon Valley. In fact, we're trying to get the New York Times and other media outlets to change their style sheets, to stop referring to the technology industry as Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is a place. The technology industry is much larger than Silicon Valley, and by indications of everybody here at this conference and what the government of Sweden is trying to do to promote technology entrepreneurship in your country and make it available to the world, technology is happening everywhere in the world. So a lot of the dynamics are the same for startups, whether you're in New York or in Sweden or frankly anywhere. The conditions may be a little different, but some of the dynamics are the same. And the rules are very different. So what we're going to do today is have maybe a 30-minute conversation among our esteemed panelists, and then we'll kind of open it up to the audience and have as much of an interactive session as we possibly can. I'm not going to read everyone's bio. If you all have your program, you'll see our esteemed panel's history. But I'm going to ask all of our panelists to make an opening statement to say hello, and then we'll start a conversation. So without further ado, Helena, could you begin, please?
Okay, thank you. Ladies first. My name is Helena Robertsson. I represent Ernst & Young, or EY, one of the gold partners. I'm a tax partner based in Stockholm, but I'm also heading what we call Nordic Private Client Services Practice, which means that our clients are high net worth individuals, private equity partners, but of course entrepreneurs. So I usually say that I work with the rich, successful and famous people. I also like to mention, I've been a tax advisor for more than 20 years, but I've also been in the IT industry. 15 years back, I was part of Spray and Spray Ventures, which was at that time a very successful Swedish company in the IT industry, competing with Google and Yahoo. Håkan?
Okay. My name is Håkan Persson, and I'm representing Precise Biometrics. I've been around in the IT industry for quite some time, working with companies like IBM and Telia and Bridge Telecom, but also a number of startups like Aspiro and what was the name of the software company doing games? Just went out of my mind. But so I find these presentations that we have heard here have been extremely interesting, because we have talked a lot about culture. And I think we have talked a lot about focus. And I think when I'm looking at my company, it's extremely important that we actually do have a focus, because I consider Precise Biometrics being rather much a startup still, even though we were founded in 1997. So we have been around for quite some time. We've got listed in the year 2000. We have been in the US since about 2001, 2002. But I still consider the company as a startup, because we haven't really made our way through to the big revenues yet. To give you a name, Precise is doing fingerprint technology on the one hand side. That's one of our business lines. And the other one is smart card solutions, where we also work with mobile devices. So from our perspective, the market is really hot right now due to the fact that fingerprint technology is actually coming into more or less the public domain through every mobile device that you can see. So I'm really happy to also say that we got our first win with Huawei, who launched their phablet here in September, where our technology is powering the device. So that's short about me and my company.
Richard?
Well, thank you, Andrew. Hi, my name is Dick Langan. I'm a partner with Nixon Peabody. We're a general service law firm based throughout the United States, Asia, and in Europe. My practice is in the corporate field, where I work with companies from startup through their venture stages to public offerings and early stage public to exits, and for some of the companies through maturity as they acquire other entities and the like. This is a great time for innovation and investment in the United States and in New York in particular. We're seeing a lot of support for companies that are either starting here or moving here through the strong educational system, the university system that's in New York, and in particular the new technology university that Cornell is opening up beginning next year, together with an Israeli university as a joint venture. There are a number of incubators and accelerators that span the gamut from technology to food services. And there's a lot going on in different pockets throughout the city, whether it is in Manhattan or in various Brooklyn neighborhoods, and also in Queens. You see a lot going on, and in the South Bronx, too, in terms of food services. So I am really looking forward to our conversation and hope for those of you who are thinking of making the move, it convinces you that this is the time to do it in the right place.
Yeah, I had the chance to introduce myself in the morning, but I represent NASDAQ, and I head up the listing business for European companies looking to list in the Nordics, but also here in the U.S. And really, I've always been in sales, and what I'm trying to sell now to the market is really for the entrepreneurs to have the vision to build their own ecosystems and use the exchange to build their own ecosystems. And I think that's a great vision to have, rather than to have the vision of trying to sell yourself off to someone else along the line. And I think that's the platform that the exchange can help these entrepreneurs build their capital base for their future growth. And that's what we're working with entrepreneurs across the globe, trying to make sure that we can provide them with the right support.
My name is Jason Albanese. I'm the CEO of Centric Digital. Centric Digital is a New York City-based digital transformation company. We work with small, medium, and large cap companies, helping them transform their business to be far more effective in the digital space, which for most of our clients means being far more effective in growing their businesses in the channels of mobile, social media, and traditional web e-commerce channels. Our business has grown rapidly over the last 4.5, 5 years. Our 3-year growth rate has been about 7,000%, which I think speaks as much to the need for digital transformation as it does to the early stage startup environment of New York. Certainly, as the CEO of the business, I have a lot of comments around the fact that having good support around you from the outside is critical, and I think that'll be a big part of my perspective today. My background is in building companies from startup through growth equity stages, and there's so many variables going on all the time that maintaining a focus and a centered focus during that process is critical. It's very easy to get distracted, and there's also an element of it's lonely at the top of an organization, even when the organization is small. And bringing advisors in, both professional services and personal advisors throughout that process, is a critical element to growing successfully and growing efficiently.
So let's actually use that as a touchstone. When we were talking before in the green room, Helena, you mentioned that it's really important to bring advisors in early. Sometimes you don't think that you're going to need that sort of either the accountant or the lawyer who's going to help you structure your company until you've got yourself up and running. So let's talk a little bit about why you should bring the advisors in early and the different kinds of advisors that there are.
Yes, I think that's the most frequent mistake I come across as an advisor, that we're brought in too late. You've already gone too far. It's very difficult to back what's happened. Legal documents have been signed, accounts have been handed in, tax return has been handed in. As I have a recent example, we helped up an entrepreneur in the music industry that was expanding here in the US, and he had been advised because he hadn't really given the full picture to his advisor either. So he'd been given the advice to start up an LLC here in the US, which seemed to be very smart from a US tax perspective. But no one really checked his Swedish tax status, and he hadn't really exited Sweden, so he also had a major Swedish tax liability. And he ended up paying a lot of taxes, unexpected taxes in Sweden. The positive thing, if you can find such a thing in this case, was that at least you can, in Sweden, disclose voluntarily or make amendments, and quite easily. So we handed in new tax returns, and he had to pay the taxes due, but no surcharges, no penalties, or any other bad consequences. And it is my understanding that it isn't necessarily that easy. If you do things wrong in the US and time passes, then it can be much more difficult to correct and amend.
Well, Helena, sometimes it's very difficult to unwind these, and so occasionally we'll see companies, for instance, start up an LLC to begin with, and obviously you have passive income tax issues associated with that because just the way the tax treaties work between the U.S. and Sweden, and often those companies will have to just basically stop their operations, reverse course, and then begin again anew with a more conventional structure that works.
And had just an advisor been pulled in, a global team been pulled in from the beginning, and it wouldn't have been that costly, then we could really have saved a lot of money.
It's also a little bit about the type of advisor, because if you're an accountant, you actually can't get equity or offer advice without there being clear lines of compensation, correct?
Well, it's very difficult. We cannot get paid in terms of stock option or shares. We need to be paid in cash, and we also, we now work, coming from one big four firm, we work in a very regulated area, as you all are aware of. We all also know the history around Enron and what came after that. So it's a bit complicated, yes, but it doesn't need to be that expensive if you work efficient.
So putting aside the accounting for a second, if you're starting a company and you're thinking, okay, so I'm going to build a product that I'm going to start, and let's say it's in Sweden, but I want to be able to export my product or services or expand beyond the borders of Sweden to a much larger market, what kind of advisors do I need to bring in early so that I structure my company properly so that I can actually make those steps? I may not know what the laws are in other parts of the world. I may not know what the various mechanisms are. So what's the kind of advisor that you would recommend a company that's thinking globally take on early on? If the advice is to take on advisors early, accounting is one piece of it, but developing a strategy for growth is another.
Yes, of course. That I think always is a valid question. What kind of Håkan and I discussed that at dinner last night. We think of you should focus on your core business and bring in the experts to do the other tasks. I think, of course, if you're going global, you need someone that has experience and expertise in going global, and at least legal advice. I think that's something we heard from the last panel, that legal can get very complicated. You need someone with global legal experience and experience from the countries you're entering into, of course. Tax is also another area.
Richard, maybe you could talk a little bit about financial structure, meaning seed round or angel round, seed round, and the various financings, and structuring in a way that allows the company to grow when it goes from being a small, maybe seed-funded operation in Sweden to thinking about itself globally. Are there things that companies should really, benchmarks that they should follow or rules they should follow to make sure that their architecture of their funding matches their appetite for growth globally?
Yes. First of all, I think it's really important to have strong tax advisors because of the relationship between Swedish and U.S. tax laws. I'm a partner in a law firm, and we have tax lawyers in our law firm, and many of them know Swedish law as well as the United States. However, the big four firms have the ability of having tax partners in every significant country throughout the world, and in the United States, in every state in the United States. It's a significant advantage over what is offered over by the law firms. And I'd really recommend strongly that you consult with one of the big four firms that has those global capabilities, because it can save you from a lot of headaches. IP protection is also very important for companies right from the get-go. So you need to consider whether or not you will file for patent protection, maybe copyright protection if you have software, and other types of protections you can achieve through things like non-disclosure agreements with your employees, thinking about non-solicitation and non-competition agreements with your employees, and then assuring yourselves that every employee has signed what's called a right-to-work agreement, which essentially says that anything that they've developed while working for your company belongs to the company as opposed to them individually. It secures your ownership chain, which is critical as you grow. I suspect, Jason, you've done that right from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly in terms of going global, I think Richard's point is an excellent one. That there's certain professional services firms that really have a better global reach than others. I think that the cost-benefit analysis from the entrepreneurial perspective is the costs associated with working with some of those larger professional services firms, which to the point that was made earlier, usually cannot be compensated through any type of equity arrangement. So there's a strong balancing act, and from the entrepreneurial perspective, you're going to need that high-level expertise if you're going global. You're also going to have to be mindful of the extreme high cost of early stage capital, and wanting to be in a position as a founder or co-founder or early employee of what you're left with after dilution, after these types of costs start to mount. So there is a balancing act, and I think there's a number of things entrepreneurs can do in early stages to strike that balance. One example would be partnerships with other companies that have infrastructure already established. And I'm also a big believer in general of the overall premise of getting as many sales going in terms of proof of concept of what your business model is all about as possible, and trying to delay the costs of overhead and infrastructure associated with some of these elements as long as possible. Because the more you can show in terms of revenue generation and top-line growth, the cheaper that equity is going to become when you're raising it later, and the better yield you will get out of more expensive professional services that are going to Richard's point, give you better advice, particularly in a global environment. So that's the trick. It's very much a zero-sum game, and if you want to go with some of the best advisors, especially on the global stage, you really have to balance it carefully with the costs associated with it, and I would say leverage infrastructure that can be made available to you sometimes through partnerships that already have some of those things set up.
Let's talk about financing for a second, because I could imagine that if you're thinking globally, that you might view a funder, a strategic funder, someone who actually has offices in various parts of the world. So if it's a venture capital firm and they have offices in London and New York and Hong Kong, for example, or in Silicon Valley, that might be a better investor than somebody who's local because they don't necessarily have the same contacts.
I think that's an excellent point. I've had some experience working with early stage companies in Hungary, for example, which is another European country that, locally speaking, has a small market. And what a lot of the early stage companies have found there is that the early stage capital that they have access to, while the money is there, the sophistication of those venture funds is not necessarily there overall, let alone on the global stage. So picking smart investors and leveraging their infrastructure is, I think, an outstanding point, and I think a lot of those investors exist in the U.S. who have a lot of experience with startups, global startups, and what they bring besides capital is that infrastructure, are those channels, which could make a lot of these early stage steps in getting global a lot less painful. And I think with that in mind, you should also look at smart investors as bringing money in. Even if it's slightly more expensive, it may be worth it in the long run. So that's a cost-benefit analysis you have to do. In other words, if you're going to give up 25% of your company with one investor for X dollars and 35% of your company with another investor for the same dollars, but that investor has that infrastructure, has that experience, has that sophistication, it may well be worth the additional dilution.
So smart money versus just money.
Just a comment on that. From a NASDAQ perspective, of course, this is a lot earlier stage than the IPO. We just launched a platform called NASDAQ Private Markets. It was launched in March. We've had several liquidity events there. And the whole idea of the platform really is to bring the entrepreneur onto the platform, allow them to interact with their current investors, interact with new investors in a secured environment where they're in complete control. And the other aspect is the liquidity aspect in terms of bringing on the right investor at the right time. And I think transitioning from a local investor to a global investor and supporting their global growth. And one thing that we've actually done as a complementary acquisition to this is buying a company called Exact Equity. And really the aim of that solution, just tying into your point, is that the sophistication of bringing in venture capital money is becoming more and more complex, especially as you go global. And this tool really allows the entrepreneur to simulate exactly the fallout of different models of financing. So they can simulate in terms of how it would impact their ownership. It would allow the VCs that are already on board to simulate doing waterfall models. And I think these are additional tools that are making it, putting the entrepreneurs in more control in terms of as they develop. Because I think personally that if you're waiting too long to bring on external advisors, I think one challenge that you have is that you're not really packaging the company in all levels to become more professional and more attractive as a partner, as a potential investor candidate, but also as a company overall.
Let's talk about other kinds of advisors, because we're talking about legal advice, financial advice, accounting advice, but the challenges facing a startup, an entrepreneur, co-founders at various stages in the company are different. So what other kinds of advisors would you recommend that a founder consider, either as a mentor, somebody who's already been in the market, somebody who's actually run a company with lots of employees? What other ones would you consider to be kind of paramount to guaranteeing some success?
I'm a big fan of CEO peer groups, of which there are many nowadays, depending on the size and shape of your company. I'm personally, for example, a member of YPO. Your company has to be a certain size to get into that particular business network, but there's many others, including YEC, which is about a 5-year-old entrepreneurial network, which is excellent, and I've heard terrific things about it. There's several others, including Vistage. And these peer groups give you a platform to sit around with other CEOs and effectively commiserate, which is a very beneficial outlet. You're constantly having to make decisions. Even if your company's small and doesn't have a huge hierarchy, there's a deep feeling of isolation when you're in the CEO's role or the lead entrepreneurial role. And to get outside of that and outside of your company environment and sit in these types of CEO peer groups, listen, learn, share stories. It's a phenomenal experience. It really is great from a professional development perspective, and you get outstanding advice. And one last point is, if you're at the top of your organization, no matter how successful your organization ends up being, where are you learning from? Who are you reporting into that's making you better at what you do? Possibly a board of directors, possibly a board of advisors, but again, CEO peer groups, the great ones have outstanding programs for professional development, and they're a great outlet for that as well, just to get better at leading, running, growing, building a company.
Håkan, you mentioned earlier that what you thought was a kind of a key was keeping a sense of a startup culture from the beginning, even when you're going from small to large. So from your perspective, how do you actually maintain that? Because if you're starting out with 2 or 3 people, and then next thing you know, in 2 years you're 30, and then you're thinking about going public and you're 150, 200 people, how do you maintain a culture of startup?
I think you need all the time to try to reinvent the company, question what you do, basically. And we have gone through a rather major such an exercise, beginning with the vision, the mission, the values of the company, how do our value proposition look like, how it has developed, who is our target market, who are our customers, and to really get an alignment between these, because if you don't have that, then you will wander around and you will spend money on projects where you will not earn any money on those. And I think also from the startup perspective and the international context, if you want to build an international company coming from Sweden, which is a small market, you need to go international. You also need to think international from the outset. So you mentioned IP, legal structures and financing, of course, but also looking at what close-by advice can you get in terms of board members, advisory board members who have done the journey and so forth. There are a number of people who are accessible for that, and they potentially do not cost that much. But also, as Lars said, you need to focus. You cannot be everywhere. You need to focus on what is to be my core market and how do I get there. And focus is also about the operational part of the business. I think that's where the entrepreneur needs to focus, and thus need to utilize external resources in terms of how do I set up and protect myself. When I was CEO of Scalado, we ventured into China. That could be rather difficult and dangerous. I was always a little bit nervous when I went to China, because will they ever let me out again? Because if you do something wrong, you stay until it's solved.
Don't pay your taxes.
For instance, so and how do you structure that? So as a practical thing, we talked a lot to business, but it was the name now. They changed it. Business is what's the name now? I think I wrote it down. Well, the Swedish agency that is accessible international. They can actually help you with putting the structure in place, and also to get you into credible players locally who can help you with taxes, accounting, hiring, the local labor laws, all that kind of stuff, which is extremely important.
Do you have any advisor that just personally from your perspective, that you had at the very beginning when you started that you still have today? Or do they change because of the size of the company, or because of the market reach, or the?
I mean, normally, if the relationship works, you keep it. And so one of the guys on the lawyer side, I've worked with for I think it's 10 years now, for instance, helping me from company to company, basically, as I have changed position, but with probably the same type of job. But I think what is important is that you get focused, and that you build your own partner network in what matters to you, which is the marketplace. How do I actually attack the market?
So, Richard, since we're both from New York, and we'd love to see companies come here, entrepreneurs, to think of New York as the best place to either expand or start companies. It's a very daunting place. It's also, a lot of its economic development, public policy was oriented around real estate, finance, healthcare, the media industries. So what resources or assets are available to new companies coming to New York today, and how easy are they to find?
Well, there are a lot of resources that are available. They are a little bit difficult to find. You need to find trusted advisors. We talked about the accountants and the lawyers. It's also good to have a friend who's been here ahead of you, who's gone through that experience, with whom you can talk. These peer groups that Jason mentioned are very helpful. One that I would plug is called the Association for Corporate Growth. They have a branch in New York, and then they have one in New Jersey and Westchester and Fairfield. Of all of those, I think that the one that is in Westchester and Fairfield counties, which is outside the city, is most user-friendly, and it's populated not only by entrepreneurs, but a number of providers of capital. And they have a very strong relationship among one another. The state of New York and the city of New York both have a number of structures that will assist you if you need to obtain financing. For instance, on the debt side of financing, there's a way to structure a debt transaction in which the interest that the other party receives is tax-free for companies that are going to employ manufacturing facilities. That's available through the New York City Industrial Development Authority, and the New York State Economic Development Council will be on top of all the various tax incentives and grants that are available throughout the state of New York. There is advertised on TV now a special tax incentive in New York State for companies that have businesses that you can align with a particular university at different hubs throughout the state for different industries. That might require, for instance, if you're in health services, to locate your business up in Buffalo, New York, and elsewhere for different industries. But it is very, very good, and it gives your company a 10-year tax break, which from state taxes, which can be very helpful. So those are a variety of sources that I would recommend to you in terms of trying to navigate your way through the tax breaks and the grants and the like that you can find. The SACC New York, I'd give a strong plug for, because they've been here for 100 years and they know their way around the United States as well as New York, and can help you on your journey.
So Adam, wasn't aware of NASDAQ's ability to help small companies. I always kind of thought, well, I'll go talk to NASDAQ when I'm ready to go public.
Yeah.
So whether you're a foreign company thinking of coming to New York or whether you're a startup in New York, I'm just curious, could you talk a little bit more about NASDAQ's ecosystem and how it could be helpful to companies long before they're even thinking about going public?
Yeah, I mean, we're launching different initiatives now. We're launching the Entrepreneurial Center in San Francisco. It's going to be announced next week. And that's, again, going back to the roots of where we want to be in terms of working with entrepreneurs. So in terms of the schooling, sharing the experiences, making sure, and we're going to try to make that available for the European entrepreneurs coming over to the U.S. because very quickly, I mean, many of the entrepreneurs that we've met here today are, on their way to San Francisco and want to navigate that world. And I think we have a role to play because we have a very strong ecosystem around NASDAQ here in terms of VCs, in terms of private equity, in terms of different advisories that could be, easily tapped through our ecosystem. And that's where we have a role to play, not only for the U.S. companies, but for foreign companies coming over here. And I think a part of this event, really, that we're trying to do, this is a start, we can probably do more going forward, is to make sure that we can help the companies navigate that. The next step is then the NASDAQ private market. So NASDAQ private market is to make sure that we can help private companies manage their investors, manage their liquidity, create a liquidity event, even before they go public, so that they come better prepared, really putting on the right size of suit before they go public, rather than rushing into an IPO, because an IPO is a daunting task for many companies. At the end of the day, it does make the company stronger, it does make the company better, more visible, more credible, but you have to come well prepared. And that's where we can work quite early with the companies in terms of preparing them, making sure that they know what they need to do in order to be prepared. And we can also work with the advisors around that ecosystem to guide them to which are the advisors that have worked with other companies coming from Europe, listing here in the US. I mean, we've had companies such as Yandex, from the Russian market, listing here. They want the valuation, they want the peers, the investors. But at the end of the day, their ecosystem is in Russia, it's not here. So we can help them in terms of making sure that their advisors, guide them throughout the process and not decide their path, but at least provide them with the assets or the guiding towards making sure that it's a smoother ride.
So, Helena, if a company is thinking about going public and it's thinking about itself internationally, how does it choose what market to go to for its listing? I mean, there are lots of smaller markets that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. I think, we listened to Lars' story around Click, Tech or Click, and I think it's important that you decide what is the ambition with an IPO. I mean, we have companies, I look at it from a European perspective, and I have companies that are in certain sectors, and they already have, one forgets, they already have a strong ownership base which is coming out to the US. They have a large peer group which is coming out to the US, which have established a sort of a ground here. So it's not necessarily that they need to grow in the US in the first instance, but they're looking for their peer group, the investor base, which understands their business model and can give it the right valuation to support them going forward. The other aspect is if you want to grow in the US, you also have to decide. I mean, Ericsson has done very well without necessarily listing here. And there are many other examples that have done very well. Elekta, for example, has done very well without listing here. They've done it in the Stockholm market. But there is an added value that comes from an additional investment and additional cost of potentially seeking a larger investor pocket here, but also getting more visibility and credibility when it comes to addressing the US market and a global market.
Helena, do you want to comment on this?
Well, I would agree with you on that. I think well, never underestimate the efforts it takes to go for an IPO. I think that's our mutual experience. We've worked together, and we see that it always takes much longer time. It takes much more efforts. And we had also in the previous panel a discussion about prototyping and test checking. It really takes time. And you could also try out, should we IPO in the US market or should we do it local? And I think that's also something you need to test before you decide where to go.
And coming into the test aspect, you know, the US did a great initiative in 2012 with the Jobs Act, where basically if you have revenues less than $1 billion a year, you're able to really test the market in terms of going out, talking to investors, filing confidentially, really not exposing yourself publicly that you are aiming for an IPO, and then make the assessment that, you know, find the right investor base, find the right profiling in terms of your company to make sure that you come best prepared. And maybe the time is not right for your IPO, but you can push on it without exposing yourself too much. And that's where I think the Jobs Act has been very...
Is there any inherent tension, though, between looking at the opportunities based on pragmatic points that you just made, and your investors who may have relationships with bankers or have relationships with exchanges where they're saying, no, we're just going to do it this way because your shareholders or your private shareholders are looking for a vehicle for themselves to get liquid as opposed to what you're trying to do? I mean, is there a tension between what the market offers and what investors, you know, is there a possible break between what a founder wants and what the investors want when it comes to choosing an exchange?
I think there might be. I mean, each case is different, but there are different, you know, of course, at the end of the day, I think, at the end of the day, many of the founders are the key drivers in the IPO process with a lot of good advice from the owners. And at the end of the day, I think it's a balance between finding the right valuation platform the day of the IPO, but it's also going to be the right platform for that company to grow further. And you also have to keep in mind that the US might be a deep investor pocket from an IPO perspective and from a listing perspective, but it's also a bigger market to navigate. And in terms of visibility, which is a key asset from a company when you are listed, you need to ensure that you are visible and that you have a great dialogue with your investors going forward. And that might be in the local market. So you've got to find that right balance. And each case is different, but of course, at the end of the day, many VC-owned companies the IPO is driven not by the VC, but it's driven by the founders. And I think that's the way the VCs want it, that the founders are in the driver's seats, the ones who are in control, making the ultimate decision. But of course, the VC should be providing them with useful advice.
We're finding that the Jobs Act is a terrific tool because companies that make these confidential filings use those filings for two purposes. One is to be ready to go whenever they want to. You don't need an underwriter when you do the filing. Correct. You don't need an investment bank. You don't necessarily need to designate which exchange you're going to be because you can file an amendment and change that. But you also then have the discipline of having financial statements that are up to date and ready, and a story for the company that's presented in your prospectus, which is filed confidentially with the SEC. And many companies do a dual track between considering whether to go public and selling the company through M&A, and they use their disclosure document essentially as their confidential information memo on the M&A track. And it's a very interesting way to see who wins the race the fastest with these companies.
And I think, I mean, I wish I would have said I've gone through the process myself as an entrepreneur, but I haven't. But I think at the end of the day, you should see it as an investment and not necessarily as a cost, because it's a great way to sense the market in terms of the investors. What's the feedback you're getting? Are you on the right track? How do they value your company? And that's the confidential environment that the Jobs Act has done. They've also reduced some of the parameters for these companies less than $1 billion in terms of financial history. It's 2 years instead of 3. And I think companies are being more and more able to handle the SOX compliance issue, et cetera. So I think the globalization of the markets, which we really saw in 2008, which was a negative, is also positive now that the global markets are much more global. The financial markets are much more global, and you can tap into different investment pools in a much easier way than it was before.
So we have about 10 minutes left, so just curious if anybody has any comments, observations, experiences related to outside support, whether it would be, you know, hired support, legal or financial, or just advisors from the perspective of running a company. Is there anybody who would like to ask a question or has a comment? I've always learned this, that, you know, the Europeans at conferences never like raising their hands. In America, everybody would have their hand up. We'd have to have microphones around the entire room. There must be somebody here who has a comment about this panel.
We should mic everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
You might hear stuff.
There we go. There we go. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
How much does it cost?
Yeah, so it's
and where can we find it?
Yeah, so two things. NPM is the platform, and around that we've built service offering, and what we've typically seen is that companies, you know, they start with Excel sheets. That's where their cap table is, and really we think, you know, there could be a level of sophistication there, so that's really what that tool is aiming at. And we're not looking for companies that are mature, late-stage companies. We're looking to provide that service at an earlier stage, and you can grow into that model. So you can start at a very early stage as an entrepreneur and then grow into it. The thing is, it's not only the management of the cap table, which is transitioned into a more electronic platform and a more sophisticated tool, but it's then also the simulation capabilities that the tool provides. So when you start raising funds and you want to see what other proposals are there, you know, in terms of what you were saying, the local models of the VCs, of the local VCs, are typically a bit more, in some cases, less sophisticated, and as soon as they started getting exposed to the US base, I think it's a great opportunity or a great tool for the entrepreneur to use to simulate the different fallouts of these different models when raising capital in the long run. So in terms of pricing, I think it's a very accessible tool for startups. That's the aim, but then you can grow into it depending on how you grow, as in terms of number of users, depending on the overall growth of the company.
Adam, it sounds so great. I actually want to invite you to demo it at the New York Tech Meetup.
I would love to.
You know,
set that up.
In fact, it's another resource for the.
But it's a proven tool. We bought an existing company, and we're making it more sophisticated, and we're trying to roll it out on a global level. But focus is on the U.S. right now.
Please.
Just a follow-up question. How would you compare that to the Founders Suite of tools for entrepreneurs?
The Founder Suite, in terms of?
It's a startup in San Francisco that has a whole whole suite of tools.
I'm not necessarily the right person to compare it. But I can get back to you on that.
But since we're sharing resources about outside support, does anybody else have any that you thought of that weren't mentioned, that maybe should have been mentioned? Please.
I think the visa issue is something that a lot of entrepreneurs need to address, right? If you want to come to the US and start your company, you need permission to work.
Yeah,
what's your take on that?
Yes, I fully agree. It's not just the compliance for the company, it's also all the compliance issues around you as an individual, and also the interface employer and employee. And that is also something I find many times haven't been addressed correctly, and it's also very complicated to do.
This is the place where the Americans apologize for our political system.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, we do a lot of lobbying as an exchange to improve that. I mean, where we can, because it's a clear challenge of getting talent, and that talent is not only here, but you need to be able to access talent more easily. So a lot of work has to be done, but we're trying to do, and at least from an exchange perspective, to help out there as well.
Yep.
I think that's very important. I work in Boston, and we see a lot of talent coming out of MIT and all this, universities up there, and it's hard. It's very hard for so many talented students that wants to be, entrepreneurs and have great ideas, and they can't stay. It's too complicated and expensive. So please bring it.
For those who don't know, Adam left because he's going to close the Stockholm Exchange. And there's some sort of secret briefcase there. They open up and he presses a button and they shut the whole thing down. So he had to leave the panel. But he'll be back afterwards to mingle with us. Anybody else with any other? I think the immigration one is a really important one, really tough one. So finding a good lawyer, immigration lawyer, understands the U.S. situation is important. Any other resources or thoughts, advisors? Andrew?
Just in terms of understanding in the United States the regulatory approaches, different companies need to deal with different regulations. So coming to the United States is very different than, we have different oversight, whether not just the SEC, but the FCC, CPSC, various agencies people don't even know about in the States level. So I think that's one area that I would just, offer up certainly more of the legal aspect, and there are, diversity. Of course, communication, how to articulate.
Yeah, that, by the way, continues to be an ongoing challenge for just even U.S. companies. If you've probably read a little bit about the sharing economy companies like Uber and Airbnb and the challenges that they're facing, and there are regulations related to federal law, and then there's regulations related to local law, state law, city laws, and it's very hard to figure out who's the agency or who's the entity that I need to speak to in order to be able to run my company. And sometimes you can even just go ahead and be told by one agency that you're running the company fine, and another agency shows up and says, sorry, you've broken the law. So the problem is that actually the governments in general are not able to move as fast as the technologies and the companies that want to grow. That's actually a big problem.
That's exactly it, Andrew. And there are many areas in which this comes up. And if you're innovative, often you're moving much faster than the law reacts to it. And often you'll get advice from lawyers that this is illegal, you can't do that. But in most cases, you have to exercise your business judgment as to whether what you're doing is for the common good, does it make sense, and typically the law catches up over time. Occasionally people will act in a way in which it's not for the common good and the law will act adversely to them. But by and large, if you're doing something that's smart and makes a lot of sense, you won't be subject to legal repercussions. Let me give you an example. A number of companies sell alcohol over the internet. It's basically illegal. But they are not, for the most part, regulated by the state liquor authorities because of what they do is done in a responsible way. They have checks and balances to make sure minors aren't consuming the product and the like. You see the same thing come up with different privacy concerns. You see with Airbnb with regard to local laws on licensing of hotels and the like, and hotel taxes. If you're going to push the law when it comes to tax, that's probably not a good idea. But when it comes to introducing a product that's innovative and provides something good to the public, you need to think twice about the legal advice that you're getting and try to assure yourself that what you're doing ethically makes sense and that the law will catch up with you.
I can just make one observation there, which is that if you're actually creating a product that is competing against large multinational corporations with lots of lobbyists who have given tons of money to members of Congress over the years, you're going to have a hard time too.
Well, you saw that with internet startups. Who won that battle? It was the incumbent telephone companies, yes.
Right, particularly around broadband and telco issues is the real problem. So, but all of the, I mean, in fact, any industry that feels threatened by innovation is going to try to use its political clout or its regulatory relationships to try to keep competition from happening, for sure. I think we're running out of time. Anybody else? One last comment or question? Please.
Okay, this is Agneta Rosenberg again from Chicago.
Welcome.
I think most entrepreneurs who come from Sweden are generally most interested in getting customers. And one amazing resource that we have here in the United States is that we have an association for almost everything that you can ever imagine. And there are over 35,000 associations. And that's a way to get very close with potential customers and partners at a very early stage. So that's my little suggestion.
So again, another shout out for the New York Tech Meetup. So quick 30-second comment from each of our panelists to close us out. Helena, the last piece of advice or a thought?
I think I want to repeat to say that focus on your core business and bring in the experts for the rest.
Håkan?
Yeah, I think I agree with that one. That's, I mean, there are resources out there, and they are available through SACC or Business Sweden, which is the agency which we have used a lot also. So they are out there, but if you don't keep your eye on the ball, you will not succeed anyway. So, so I think that is where your focus needs to be.
When reaching out to an expert, try to find someone who's compatible with your vision and the way you want to work. You need to balance the cost of it with getting the right advice. Getting the right advice is part of the branding of your company in order to show investors and the like that you're on top of your game and are well planned and the like, but you don't need to go overboard with it if you find the right.
Hold on one second. We're going to switch to Adam closing the stock exchange, I think, right?
We just got a
Live feed. Adam's final comment is going to be done.
Can we beam it up on the big screen, please? We need it on the big screen?
We can see it.
Okay, here we go.
How delighted and proud we are to partner with NASDAQ for our new innovative project, Innovate46, and how grateful we are to NASDAQ for so generously hosting us here today at their market site. Innovate46 is a new forum created by the Swedish-American Chamber of Commerce here in New York. And since Sweden is ranked as the second most innovative country in the world by the Global Innovation Index, we see it as only fitting that we as the Swedish-American Chamber here in New York host this forum when we make it possible for Swedish entrepreneurs and innovation to meet American capital. And today's conference is showcasing some of the most innovative ideas and brightest entrepreneurs. And we are extremely grateful, and I would like to extend a warm thank you to Adam and his excellent crew here at NASDAQ for their invaluable input and insights throughout the whole planning process of this event. And needless to say, we are deeply honored and to have been given this special task of closing the Swedish market from the heart of New York City at the NASDAQ's market site. Thank you so much.
Commemorate this day, and we have a listing crystal here, or a crystal, which represents our partnership going forward, and we can do a lot more together. And congratulations on this achievement.
This is actually being streamed back to Sweden and through NASDAQ systems.
Thank you.
The award.
2 more minutes. Oh, okay. So, Andrew, I know that.
No, I mean, we should. I don't know. I think we could just let everybody. Richard, you should finish your comment, and then we'll just wrap up the panel. So any other final thoughts?
No, thanks.
Great, thanks, Jason.
I think my parting thought would be that from the entrepreneurial seat, don't be afraid as your business grows and changes to change out your advisors and your outside support. They don't always grow appropriately with the business, and the advisors and support you put in place when you're at stage A may not cut it when you're at stage B or C, et cetera. And those can often be challenging decisions to make, but don't be afraid to make them. It's an important part of growing.
And with that, thank you for making so much time and patience with our panel, and we'll see you out. I guess we're going to take a break now.
We're going to do the bell in about 30 seconds. So
Okay.
Stay seated, and then we'll break, and then we have our next speaker.
Okay. What is that red box next?
I think that's the symbolic timing. That's what I'm just going to think. Maybe it'll flash. Let's see.
Why do I think like David Copperfield is going to arrive?
I'll come back.
They disappear and levitate. What happens?
Smoke.
Yeah, exactly. Full of.
I think that was the official close in Stockholm.
Were we up today?
What's that?
Were we up today or down?
All right. The up or down?
Up, down. Okay, then we should applaud its closing. That's That's right. Oh, yeah. There it goes. I got it.
See how now the yellow is around the red.
Yeah. Oh, that screen in the middle is odd.
Thank you to our panel.
Thank you very much.
Just gonna
Thank you,
start
everybody.
to the right. Again, I just want to thank our sponsors who are giving us our gifts.
Thank you very much.
Today, they are coming from our Brooklyn.
Thank you very much.
And also from
Thank you.
Urban